The council chamber fell silent as Admiral Zektar limped toward the central podium, his crystalline exoskeleton bearing the scars of countless battles across 17 star systems. The assembled representatives from 43 species watched with a mixture of respect and curiosity as the legendary Kytherian warrior positioned himself before the holographic display showing recent territorial expansions in the Outer Rim. Honored delegates, Zektar began, his voice carrying the weight of 6 decades of military service. I stand before you today not as a conqueror, but as one who has witnessed the rise of something we are wholly unprepared to face. His forearms gestured toward the star map, where a small cluster of yellow systems pulsed ominously near the edge of known space. 3 cycles ago, we encountered a species that defies every tactical doctrine, every strategic framework we have developed over millennia of galactic warfare. Ambassador THYSS of the Reptilian Confederacy leaned forward, her scaled features reflecting skepticism. Admiral, with respect, your reputation precedes you. The Kytherian Armada has never met a species it could not subjugate or eliminate. What makes these, humans, so different? Zektar's mandibles clicked in what humans might recognize as bitter laughter. Because, Ambassador, they hunt for sport. They hunt for survival. They hunt because it is woven into the very fabric of their existence. When we thought we were the predators, we discovered we had become prey. The hologram shifted to display footage from the first contact incident at Kepler, for 42b. The assembled delegates watched in fascination as primitive-looking vessels, barely larger than fighter craft, darted between massive Kytherian dreadnoughts with impossible agility. What should have been a routine subjugation had turned into a nightmare that still haunted Zektar's dreams. Our intelligence suggested a recently spacefaring civilization, he continued, phantom pain shooting through his missing left arm. Their technology appeared crude, their ships held together with what they call duct tape and determination. We expected swift victory, quick integration into our empire. Instead, we found ourselves facing beings who treat warfare like an art form passed down through countless generations of violence. The Valdorian delegate, whose species prided itself on intellectual superiority, interjected with obvious disdain. Surely you exaggerate, Admiral. No species can match Kytherian military might through primitive aggression alone. Primitive. Zektar's exoskeleton darkened with agitation. Their primitive tactics involved using our own gravitational weapons against us by luring us into asteroid fields they had secretly mined with nuclear devices. Their crude technology somehow adapted to our energy shields within hours of first contact. Their backward society produced soldiers who continued fighting with severed limbs, who turned their own medical bays into death traps, who sang ancient war songs while their ships burned around them. The chamber erupted in uncomfortable murmurs as Zektar activated another holographic sequence. This one showed human boarding parties moving through Kytherian corridors with fluid, practiced efficiency that spoke of countless generations spent perfecting the art of close-quarters combat. Watch their movements, he instructed, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. See how they flow through confined spaces like liquid death. Notice how they instinctively coordinate without communication devices, how they anticipate threats that have not yet materialized. This is not learned behavior, delegates. This is evolution sculpted by millions of years of predatory refinement. The footage showed humans adapting to ship layouts in real time, turning maintenance shafts into ambush points, using their own wounded as bait to lure Kytherian warriors into carefully prepared kill zones. What disturbed Zektar most was not their tactical brilliance, but the casual efficiency with which they dismantled superior technology using improvised weapons and sheer determination. They study their prey, he continued, advancing to more disturbing footage. While we observed their home system, they were simultaneously infiltrating our communication networks, learning our language, analyzing our tactical patterns. By the time we realized the depth of their intelligence gathering, they had already identified and targeted the personal quarters of our command staff aboard vessels they had never seen. Ambassador Kreetalk of the Silicon Collective, whose people had mastered warfare through pure logic, struggled to process what she was witnessing. This suggests a level of adaptive intelligence that should take centuries to develop. How do they process tactical information so rapidly? Because war is their natural state, Zektar replied grimly. Their entire evolutionary history is written in blood. They emerged from a death world where everything, including their own planet, tried to kill them daily. They developed persistence hunting, pack tactics, tool creation, and strategic thinking not as military innovations, but as basic survival requirements. The display shifted again, showing human settlements on worlds that should have been uninhabitable. Colonies thriving in radiation zones that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Cities built inside active volcanic regions where the inhabitants used geothermal energy while living in conditions that would be considered elaborate torture chambers by any civilized standard. Look at their choice of habitat, Zektar gestured with his remaining arms. They do not seek paradise worlds. They actively colonize the most hostile environments they can find because challenge and hardship make them stronger. They terraform by adapting themselves to impossible conditions rather than changing the environment to suit their needs. The graceful speaker of the ethereal communion, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical violence eons ago, shimmered with disturbance. This suggests a species fundamentally incompatible with peaceful coexistence. Surely diplomacy remains an option. Zektar's response came laden with dark experience. We attempted communication 17 different ways. Each diplomatic envoy we sent returned with intelligence they had gathered about our military capabilities, ship designs, and command structures. They turned every peace negotiation into reconnaissance missions. When we finally realized the depth of their deception, we discovered they had been treating our diplomatic overtures as elaborate intelligence tests. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the chamber's atmospheric processors. Delegates who had spent their lives believing in the fundamental rationality of galactic politics struggled to comprehend a species that viewed diplomacy as merely another form of warfare. Their most terrifying characteristic is not their individual lethality, Zektar continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone recounting a recurring nightmare. It is their absolute refusal to accept defeat. We destroyed their colonies, and they rebuilt them stronger. We eliminated their fleets, and they returned with improved designs based on detailed analysis of their own failures. We captured their worlds, and they waged guerrilla campaigns that lasted decades, turning every occupation into a bleeding wound that slowly drained our resources. The holographic display showed the aftermath of what humans called the 37-day war, though Kytherian records indicated the conflict lasted nearly 3 years due to human persistence. Images of human survivors emerging from underground bunkers after months of bombardment, immediately beginning reconstruction efforts while simultaneously planning counterattacks against occupying forces. They do not surrender, Zektar stated with absolute certainty. The concept does not exist in their vocabulary except as a tactical deception. When cornered, they become more dangerous. When outnumbered, they adapt. When facing extinction, they evolve. They are the only species we have encountered that treats total warfare as a sustainable lifestyle rather than a temporary aberration. The tension in the council chamber had shifted from skepticism to genuine concern as Admiral Zektar continued his testimony. The holographic displays now showed detailed tactical analyses that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of humanity's military capabilities. The Battle of Proxima Station marked the turning point in our understanding, Zektar continued, his crystalline features reflecting the ambient light as painful memories surfaced. We had cornered a human fleet of 12 vessels against a neutron star. Our tactical computers calculated a 97% probability of complete human annihilation within 6 hours. We outnumbered them 40-1, possessed superior firepower, and controlled all escape routes. Ambassador THYSS shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Surely the outcome was predetermined in your favor. The humans won, Zektar replied flatly, letting the impossible statement hang in the air. Not only did they win, but they captured 16 of our vessels intact, turned our own gravitational weapons against us, and somehow used the neutron star's magnetic field to disable our entire electronic warfare suite. When our reinforcements arrived 18 hours later, they found the human fleet had vanished completely, leaving behind only wreckage and a message. What did the message contain? Asked the Valdorian delegate, his intellectual curiosity overriding his previous disdain. Zektar activated a new display showing a simple text transmission in perfect Kytherian script. Thank you for the ships. We'll put them to good use. Next time, bring more interesting challenges. Signed, Admiral Sarah Chen, Human Colonial Defense Force. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications. A species that had been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries had not only defeated a vastly superior force but had done so with such confidence they could afford to be condescending in victory. The captured vessels, Zektar continued, were reverse-engineered within months. When we next encountered human forces, they were flying hybrid ships that combined our technology with their own innovations. Somehow, they had improved upon designs we had perfected over millennia. Their modifications made our own ships faster, more efficient, and deadlier than we had ever imagined possible. The hologram shifted to show comparative technical specifications. Human-modified Kytherian vessels displayed energy outputs that exceeded original parameters by 30 to 50%, while maintaining structural integrity that should have been impossible given the modifications. How is such rapid technological advancement possible? Inquired the Silicon Collective representative. Her logical process is struggling to accommodate the data. Because they do not innovate through committee or prolonged research, Zektar explained. They innovate through necessity under combat conditions. Every engagement teaches them something new, and they apply those lessons immediately to the next battle. They have weaponized the scientific method itself, turning each conflict into a laboratory for testing new tactical and technological concepts. The display showed footage from later encounters where human vessels exhibited capabilities that defied Kytherian understanding of physics. Ships performing maneuvers that should have killed their crews, weapons systems that somehow bent energy around obstacles, and defensive measures that seemed to anticipate attacks before they were launched. Their adaptation extends beyond technology, Zektar continued, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. We began intercepting their communications and discovered they were studying us with the same intensity we normally reserve for prey animals. They had categorized our behavioral patterns, identified individual command styles among our officers, and developed psychological profiles of our leadership that were more accurate than our own internal assessments. Ambassador Kreetalk leaned forward with obvious interest. You're suggesting they were conducting behavioral analysis during combat operations? More than that, Zektar replied grimly. They were conducting controlled experiments. We realized they were deliberately allowing certain engagements to continue longer than necessary, testing our responses to various scenarios. They were using our own forces as unwilling participants in elaborate tactical studies. Every battle we thought we were fighting for territory or resources, they were fighting for knowledge. The revelation sent uncomfortable ripples through the assembled delegates. The concept of a species that treated warfare as scientific research challenged fundamental assumptions about military conflict. The siege of Kepler, for 38C, demonstrated the full extent of their strategic thinking, Zektar continued, activating footage from what many considered the most decisive engagement of the conflict. We surrounded their primary colony world with 300 vessels, implementing a blockade that should have forced surrender within weeks. The humans had fewer than 50 ships and limited supplies. The tactical display showed the initial siege positions, with Kytherian forces maintaining perfect geometric formations around the human world. Mathematical precision that represented centuries of military doctrine and strategic refinement. The siege lasted 14 months, Zektar stated. Not because we were unable to break their defenses, but because they gradually converted our blockade into a prison. They somehow managed to mine every approach vector, establish hidden supply lines through routes we had declared impossible to navigate, and slowly began eliminating our vessels one by one through tactics we are still trying to understand. The footage showed Kytherian ships mysteriously developing system failures, experiencing navigational errors that led them into carefully prepared ambushes, and suffering from what appeared to be equipment malfunctions that occurred with suspicious timing and frequency. They had infiltrated our supply chains, Zektar explained, his mandibles clicking with remembered frustration. Somehow, they had identified and compromised our logistics networks, introducing subtle sabotage into replacement parts and consumables. Our own maintenance procedures were slowly destroying our fleet from within. Ambassador THYSS struggled to process the implications. You're describing a level of logistical penetration that would require decades of preparation and resources we know they do not possess. Unless, Zektar replied carefully, they had been preparing since first contact, treating every interaction as an opportunity to gather intelligence about our industrial processes, supply chains, and maintenance protocols. We later discovered they had been analyzing debris from damaged vessels, studying our manufacturing techniques, and identifying vulnerabilities in our production methods. The chamber buzzed with uncomfortable recognition as delegates realized the scope of human intelligence gathering. A species that could turn casual observation into comprehensive industrial espionage represented a threat that extended far beyond military concerns. The psychological warfare was perhaps most disturbing, Zektar continued, his voice dropping to barely audible levels. They began broadcasting music during engagements. Not intimidation attempts or propaganda, but what they called battle hymns. Ancient songs from their homeworld that spoke of honor, sacrifice, and victory against impossible odds. Our psychological warfare specialists studied these transmissions and concluded they were not intended to demoralize us. Then, what was their purpose? Asked the ethereal communion speaker, genuinely puzzled. They were singing for themselves, Zektar replied with something approaching awe. They were maintaining morale and unit cohesion by connecting current battles to thousands of years of military tradition. Every engagement became part of an ongoing cultural narrative that stretched back to their earliest wars on their homeworld. They were not just fighting for territory or survival, but for the continuation of an unbroken chain of military heritage. The realization that humans viewed warfare as a cultural expression rather than simply a means to an end sent chills through the assembled delegates. A species that had elevated conflict to the level of artistic performance represented something unprecedented in galactic history. By the end of the siege, we had lost 237 vessels to a force that never numbered more than 60 ships at any given time, Zektar concluded. When we finally withdrew, the human commander transmitted a personal message thanking us for that educational experience and inviting us to return when we had developed more creative tactics. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft whisper of atmospheric recyclers working to maintain the chamber's environment. Delegates who had entered the session confident in their species' place in the galactic hierarchy now faced the uncomfortable reality that somewhere in the darkness between stars, apex predators were watching and learning. The council chamber had grown noticeably colder as Admiral Zektar prepared to deliver the final portion of his testimony. The assembled delegates, representatives of the most powerful civilizations in known space, now watched with the nervous attention of prey animals sensing a distant predator. What I am about to share with you, Zektar began, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the chamber's ambient lighting like fractured starlight, represents classified intelligence gathered at tremendous cost. 3 years ago, we initiated Operation Silent Observer, a deep reconnaissance mission designed to study human society from within their own territory. Ambassador THYSS leaned forward with obvious interest. You managed to infiltrate human space. How did they not detect your presence? They did detect us, Zektar replied grimly. Within 6 hours of entering their outer system perimeter. Rather than destroying our stealth vessels or demanding we leave, they allowed us to proceed with our mission while simultaneously conducting their own observation of our reconnaissance techniques. We thought we were studying them secretly while they were openly studying us studying them. The holographic display activated to show footage that would haunt the nightmares of every delegate present. Human children, barely old enough to walk, participating in activities that most galactic species would classify as advanced military training. Young humans learning tactical movement through what they called playground games, developing hand-eye coordination through competitive sports that simulated combat scenarios, and absorbing strategic thinking through entertainment that would challenge seasoned military analysts. This is their idea of childhood recreation, Zektar explained, his voice heavy with implications. What we consider elite military conditioning, they treat as basic childhood development. By the age of sexual maturity, the average human possesses tactical awareness and physical capabilities that exceed our special forces operatives. The Valdorian delegate stared at the footage with growing horror. They are militarizing their offspring from birth. No, Zektar corrected. They are not militarizing anything. This is their natural developmental process. They have evolved to treat survival training as entertainment, competitive violence as social bonding, and strategic thinking as basic problem-solving skills. What we see as military preparation, they experience as normal childhood. The display shifted to show human educational institutions where children learned mathematics through ballistics calculations, studied physics through weapons design, and practiced chemistry through explosive engineering. Academic subjects that other species considered purely theoretical were presented to human children as practical applications with real-world combat utility. Their entire educational system is designed to produce soldiers, observed the Silicon Collective representative. Her logical process is struggling to categorize such comprehensive militarization. Their entire educational system is designed to produce survivors, Zektar corrected again. The military applications are simply a natural extension of cognitive processes they developed over millions of years of evolutionary pressure. When humans study engineering, they instinctively consider defensive applications. When they learn chemistry, they automatically evaluate explosive potential. When they study biology, they immediately identify vulnerabilities and advantages. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated a species where military thinking was not specialized training but basic cognitive functioning. The implications suggested that humanity's war-making capacity was not limited to professional soldiers but extended to their entire population. During our observation period, we witnessed a human colony respond to a natural disaster, Zektar continued. A massive earthquake had destroyed their primary infrastructure and isolated them from outside assistance. Within hours, the civilian population had organized into tactical units, established command hierarchies, and begun coordinated rescue operations that displayed more efficiency than many military responses we have observed. The footage showed human civilians moving through disaster zones with practiced efficiency, establishing field hospitals in bombed-out buildings, coordinating supply distribution through improvised communication networks, and maintaining order through leadership structures that emerged organically from chaos. They were not following emergency protocols, Zektar explained. They were applying innate organizational behaviors that have been refined through countless generations of survival pressure. Every human instinctively understands logistics, command structure, resource allocation, and tactical coordination because these skills were necessary for basic survival on their homeworld. Ambassador Kreetalk studied the display with growing unease. You're suggesting their entire species functions as a potential military force. I am stating that their species has no meaningful distinction between civilian and military populations, Zektar replied bluntly. Every human settlement is potentially a military base. Every human civilian is potentially a soldier. Every human child is potentially a future threat that will surpass the capabilities of our current forces. The display changed again, showing human space colonies that appeared to be peaceful agricultural settlements but were actually elaborate defensive installations disguised as civilian infrastructure. Farming equipment that could be rapidly converted into weapons manufacturing, irrigation systems that doubled as fuel distribution networks, and residential buildings designed with defensive positions and interconnected tunnels. Even their peaceful activities serve military purposes, Zektar observed. Their agricultural colonies produce not just food but also chemical precursors for explosives. Their mining operations extract materials useful for both construction and weapons manufacturing. Their research stations develop technologies with both civilian and military applications. Everything they build serves multiple purposes, with warfare being a constant consideration. The ethereal communion speaker shimmered with disturbance. This level of militarization seems to violate every principle of civilized development. How do they maintain social cohesion without destroying themselves? Through controlled competition, Zektar explained, activating footage of human recreational activities that resembled elaborate military exercises. They channel their aggressive instincts through sports, competitions, and games that serve as pressure release valves while simultaneously maintaining combat readiness. Their entertainment industry produces scenarios that train tactical thinking, their recreational activities develop physical capabilities, and their social interactions reinforce pack bonding and hierarchy establishment. The delegates watched in fascination as humans engaged in activities that combined athletic competition with tactical simulation, creative expression with strategic planning, and social interaction with leadership development. What other species accomplished through dedicated military training, humans achieved through leisure activities. The most disturbing discovery, Zektar continued, his voice dropping to barely audible levels, was their long-term planning capabilities. We found evidence that they are already preparing for conflicts that may not occur for centuries. They are developing technologies, training populations, and establishing resources for wars against enemies they have not yet encountered. The holographic display showed human deep space installations designed not for exploration or colonization but for extended military operations in unknown territories. Supply depots positioned at strategic intervals, communication networks designed for wartime operations, and manufacturing facilities capable of producing military equipment for campaigns lasting decades. They are not simply expanding into space, Zektar explained. They are establishing the infrastructure necessary to wage war across multiple star systems simultaneously. Every colony they plant, every space station they construct, every trade route they establish serves to extend their military reach further into the galaxy. Ambassador THYSS struggled to process the implications. Are you suggesting they are planning aggressive expansion? I am suggesting they are planning for survival in a galaxy they assume will eventually become hostile, Zektar replied carefully. They are not necessarily planning to attack other species, but they are absolutely prepared to defend themselves against any threat that might emerge. The problem is that their defensive preparations are indistinguishable from offensive capabilities. The chamber erupted in uncomfortable murmurs as delegates realized the fundamental misunderstanding that had colored all previous interactions with humanity. What the galactic community had interpreted as aggressive militarization was actually elaborate defensive preparation by a species that had learned to expect the worst possible scenarios. My final recommendation to this council, Zektar concluded, his crystalline features reflecting the weight of hard-earned wisdom, is that we treat humanity not as a potential enemy to be defeated or a rival to be conquered, but as apex predators to be respected and, if possible, avoided. They are not evil or malicious, but they are fundamentally incompatible with the peaceful coexistence that forms the foundation of our galactic civilization. What do you suggest we do? Asked the Valdorian delegate, his previous intellectual arrogance replaced by genuine concern. We establish clear boundaries, avoid territorial conflicts, and, under no circumstances should we ever make them feel threatened, Zektar replied with absolute certainty. A threatened human is a dangerous human, and dangerous humans have an unfortunate tendency to become dead humans only after they have eliminated everything they perceive as a threat. The Admiral paused, allowing his words to sink in before delivering his final warning. We have encountered a species that has weaponized evolution itself, turning survival pressure into a competitive advantage. They are not stronger than us, faster than us, or smarter than us individually. But, collectively, they represent something unprecedented in galactic history. An entire species that treats warfare not as an aberration to be avoided, but as a fundamental aspect of existence to be mastered. They are apex hunters, delegates. And we have just learned that we live in their hunting ground. The silence that followed Zektar's testimony would mark the beginning of a new era in galactic politics, where the delicate balance of power among civilized species would be forever altered by the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity was watching, learning, and preparing for whatever challenges the universe might provide. As the council chamber slowly emptied, delegates departing to brief their respective governments on this paradigm-shifting intelligence, Admiral Zektar remained at the podium, staring at the holographic display showing human space. His warning had been delivered, his duty fulfilled. Whether the galactic community would heed his advice or choose to test humanity's defensive capabilities remained to be seen. In the depths of space, human colonies continued their steady expansion, each new settlement another piece in a vast strategic puzzle that would take centuries to complete. They built not for conquest but for survival, not for aggression but for security. The tragedy was that in a galaxy unprepared for apex predators, the distinction between defense and offense had become meaningless. Admiral Zektar knew that regardless of good intentions on both sides, contact with humanity would forever change the nature of galactic civilization. The age of peaceful expansion and diplomatic resolution was ending, replaced by an era where survival would once again become the primary consideration for every species among the stars.